Hi, everyone, and welcome to the In the Shoes of podcast, where I make it my goal to see life as much as possible from someone else's point of view. Just like we all have a unique heartbeat, every single one of us sees life only from our own perspectives. Think about it. Can you see and process life exactly as Elon Musk sees and processes life? The answer is you can't, and it applies to every living conscious being here on this pale blue dot. So for the listeners out there, I am so pleased to have Jodie Guerrero on the line with me. And thank you, Jodie, for agreeing
No
to
worries.
be on the show. You have an
Mm,
awesome journey that you've been through,
yep.
and I can't wait to hear all about it. And I want to let that
Mm.
happen naturally. And I want to ask you how you define yourself to the outside world.
Yeah, so I'm a 46-year-old mum, or mom, whatever you want to say it as, in the US.
You can say mom.
With two teenage girls who have special needs, and my husband's actually from San Francisco. I'm an Aussie, as you can hear from my accent. We live in Brisbane, Australia, and yeah, I'm what you would call probably a consumer health advocate, and that's someone who helps other patients deal with their health and chronic illness journey. So there are quite a few health advocates in the United States. There are very few of them here in Australia. Some of them um, do it as a voluntary type of thing, where they go on committees and do all sorts of things to change health policy. And some people do it also for patients to assist them through their own difficulties, whether that be an awful nightmare or something they're just finding hard to cope with. And often, what I find is that when you go in to have treatment in the hospital, and I'm always in the hospital for something or other, when you sit down and have your treatment, you often find yourself talking to patients around you, people who are going through a similar thing. And sometimes you actually find some really good tips from other patients that you don't find through your doctor. And some of these tips have led me to find medications and different things along the journey that have helped me enormously. And so I wanted to take my lemons and turn them into lemonade. I'm sure many people have heard that saying before. I just wanted to make
Sure.
sure
Yeah.
I used what has been awful and turned it into something really good, because what's the use in sitting around worrying about things when someone else could use that information, someone else can use that experience as an inspiration for them. And
Right.
I just think that, I guess it depends on the type of person you are. If you're a person who sees the world like a glass half full or a glass half empty, I'm the type of person that sees everything in a positive light, even when it's not positive. Or I try to anyway.
Yeah.
So,
Well, right.
um,
And you try to help others in the
yeah,
meantime
so
too,
like
right?
I come into contact with people through my website, through social media, and through just when I go to the hospital. Some people, really struggle with particularly communication with their GP, their primary care physician, or their specialist. They have a difficulty getting across to their doctors what they really want, and they often find it hard to understand health literacy or medical
Mm-hmm.
speak, because sometimes when we go into a doctor's office, we feel like, okay, they're the authority, they know everything about my body, and they're talking in these words that I have no idea what they're saying. And I'm trying to get through to them, this is what I want, but I don't want to challenge them because it's their office. So, some people have a great deal of difficulty challenging the doctor in front of them. They feel like, well, I can't say anything to them. I've got to be careful that I don't tick them off. And then,
Oh, really?
yeah,
Okay.
it
Why,
might
why
be,
do you think that
it
is?
might be, certain people are very shy. When they're talking to
Yeah.
people, they don't like to So it depends on the generation as well. Like my parents are very careful not to rock the boat, if you know what I mean. They don't like to
Of course.
complain
Yeah.
about anything. They don't even like taking anything back to the supermarket if there's something wrong with it, if you know what I mean. Um,
Yeah, I know
and
exactly.
that's really
Yep.
an older generation, and I think that's probably because when my parents were growing up, they're Second World War type of era, and you just were happy with what you got, and
Mhm.
complaining about things or standing up and saying something like I don't agree with you is not in their psyche at all. But for us younger people, and particularly in the United States, there seems to be more of um, a willingness to challenge the status quo and to challenge what is told to you by a medical staff member. I know that's the case because I used to live over there, and it's totally different to the way people work over here in the Pacific, in the Australian region, where a lot of
Mhm.
patients and people just feel like, well, I can't challenge, I can't say anything, I can't even get a second opinion because I just think that this guy must know what he's talking about. And sometimes, doctors are human beings. They don't know everything. You know what I mean? I don't know where it came from, where we think, or some of us think that a doctor knows absolutely everything and we have to trust exactly what they're saying. Um, you know, we should really, all of us, get a second opinion, at least a second opinion, when it comes to something very serious.
Of course.
There's nothing wrong with that, and often it doesn't cost much to do that. So just like when you take your car in to be serviced, if there's a big repair job, you usually get one or two quotes. We should really treat our bodies the same way. I think we should really talk to as many medical staff as we feel comfortable doing. And then again,
Mhm.
with communication and other patients, I often find that a lot of patients have difficulty communicating with their families and their friends, around, say, they've got a cancer diagnosis and they've got 50 friends to talk to. you know, that they
Yeah.
get all
Yep.
sorts of advice from people, particularly in regards to complementary or alternative medicines. And often they don't know what to say. They don't know whether it's appropriate to reject that advice, and whether it's, there's a whole heap of things that happen to you when you become, say, a cancer patient. And it's like a quagmire of a brand new world opens up in front of you, and all of a sudden you have to think, well, is it appropriate to say this? Is it appropriate to say that? And so as a consumer health advocate, I try to lead other patients through what I've been through and give them some advice and give them some guidance and help wherever they need it.
That's probably something in the States that we could uh, learn from you to do more often. I know you mentioned that in the States it does. You've probably seen it here,
Mm.
but I don't know how much I've seen it necessarily myself. But that doesn't mean it's necessarily. Maybe it's just I've been ignorant of that. But it reminds me of being like a civil servant in a way.
Yes. Yeah.
Of being having a civic duty to
Yes.
your fellow mankind.
Yes.
So I want to find out before everything started
Yeah.
happening. I know because there are just a lot of things. Of course, I was looking over your website,
Yeah. It's a bit
and
complicated.
yeah. So if you could, I'm willing to, and I think the listeners are too.
Mm.
We're willing to sit back and have you maybe take us on your
Mm.
journey so that we
Yeah.
can kind of just try to envision how we would feel, because that's what it
Yeah.
really comes down to. We want to know exactly what you went through, and how
Yeah.
maybe we would react, or how, if something like this happens to us or is happening to a family member,
Yeah.
how we can react in the future
Yeah.
or
So
now.
I'll make it as simple as I can because, like I said before, a lot of people don't understand medical speak, and I don't want to confuse anyone. So it's important that I keep it simple. So, um, Yeah, I was basically my husband and I got married in Australia. He's from San Francisco, and we lived in the Bay Area for 4 years, which was lots of fun. Then we had a baby, and baby was, of course, born in the United States, but she had Australian citizenship, and we decided, like, we just felt that Australia was a better place to raise our kids, and we decided it was a place that we wanted to go, and we decided to go back to Australia. So we had 16 boxes and a baby, and we went back to Brisbane, Australia, which is where we are from, and to live closer to my parents. And everything was great. We bought our first house here when housing prices were really low at the time, and decided, to have the white picket fence and the big house in the backyard, and there were gum trees in the backyard. No koalas, but gum trees.
Oh, wow, nice.
And but it was a very bushy sort of rural sort of suburb. And not far away you could find kangaroos and everything. So where I live, there's quite a bit of wildlife and nature and things that Americans see on television quite a lot. And
Oh,
my
yeah.
husband really loves Australia. He wants to stay here permanently, and everything was going really well. And we had baby number two, and this is two daughters that we've had, and everything was fine until one day my husband and decided to take the kids back to the United States just so they could see the relatives. They hadn't met the two baby. Well, they'd met the first baby, but she'd grown up by that time. And while they were away, actually felt it was the best time to wean my second child, her name is Anna, and my first child was Julia. And they're now 14 and 17, so that's quite a while away. But yeah, so it was the perfect time to wean my second child because I'd been breastfeeding her, and it was about that time that when you're breastfeeding, you actually have to sort of wean yourself out of the breast milk. And so I was feeling around my body, and I found a lump on the side of my right breast. And I'm thinking, okay, my husband's away, the kids are away. What do I do? I won't see them for
Right.
another month. Should I say anything? Should I go to the doctor? I started to think maybe I had breast cancer, and actually went to a doctor and went to another doctor, actually two doctors at the time, and had it checked out. And I was told it was just an enlarged lymph node on the right side of the right breast, almost underneath my right armpit. And I thought to myself, well, they were the first doctor was very relaxed about it. I wasn't relaxed at all. I wanted to know why this lymph node was so big and enlarged and what was causing it. And the second doctor sent me to a breast clinic, and the breast clinic did a what's called a fine needle aspirate, and that's where they take a little tiny sample of liquid out of the lymph node. They have a look underneath the microscope, and they just check it to see if there's anything funny going on. And
Mhm.
there wasn't at the time, but they recommended back to the GP that I was seeing, which stands for general practitioner. In America, you call it a primary care physician.
Mhm.
And he was still very relaxed about it, and I wasn't happy with his attitude towards the fact that I was worried and he wasn't. And I decided, well, it's time to maybe get some more opinions. So I went on this journey of trying to find out why this lymph node was enlarged, and I started to get different symptoms around my body. I started to feel very tired, very lethargic, and I was working full time at the time. I was going into the downtown area of Brisbane every day, and I had the two kids and full time job. And I guess any mother would be tired if you're working full time and you've got the two little ones. And so I just put
Mhm.
it down to being just a rundown mum. Maybe I needed more sleep. And I started to get night sweats, which at the time I didn't even know were night sweats. I just thought I was hotter than my husband at nighttime.
Sure.
I'd
Yeah.
never encountered a night sweat before, so I didn't really know what it was. And
Mhm.
I was starting to get pain also down the right hand side of my body, and I just figured that I pulled a muscle. So all these little things were starting to happen, and they happened over a period of 11 months. And during that time, I was seeing doctors. I wasn't just seeing the primary care physician I was seeing at first. I was starting to ask other people, why are all these things happening to my body? I think there's something wrong. I don't feel right. And each doctor, one by one, told me, no, you're fine, you're young, you're okay, you don't have to worry about anything. And by this time, I hadn't I decided not to go back to my initial primary care physician. I didn't like him anymore. He
Mhm.
was very aloof and not very he just didn't care, really, is what I thought he was like. And I just didn't really want to go back to him. So I
Sure.
got to the point where I had so many issues in my body. I went to a ladies' camp for my church, and a couple of the ladies said, "Oh, don't worry about the doctors. You need to see a chiropractor, and you need to go to a naturopath." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." So I started seeing alternative physicians or alternative um, complementary medicine type people, and they told me a whole heap of stuff. That it was my spine, and it was my liver was out of whack, and there was other things going on. And I just believed whatever anyone told me because I was desperate. Really, I was getting to the point where I was in so much pain I could hardly sleep anymore. And this one day, I went to the bathroom, and I couldn't feel any sensation of going to the bathroom. It felt like I was just numb in that area. And that really freaked me out. And I thought,
Of course.
okay, I need to do something about this. No one's listening to me, and I'm in so much pain. So I said to my husband, if I still have this problem tomorrow, you need to take me to the emergency department because I just don't know what to do anymore. And he was starting to wonder if I was maybe making it all up. My
Mm.
parents were starting to say, oh, you're just worried about nothing. I think they all thought I was a bit of a hypochondriac. And it was very frustrating for me to try and think, well, no one believes me. No one thinks I'm actually sick. I think I am. I remember sitting actually at my work desk and saying, well, I'm actually in the city, so I must be close to an ambulance. If I fall down and have freak out, or if I fall down and faint, at least I'm near a hospital. And
Mhm.
that's kind of how I was feeling. I was feeling like people weren't listening to me. And so the next day, I still had this issue. I couldn't feel anything when I went to the bathroom. So I said to my husband, there's something very wrong with my body. And he took me there. We sat for 4 hours and waited for a doctor to come and see us. Finally, we
Oh
saw a
wow.
junior ER physician, and he said to me, look, there's some really strange things going on with your back and with this pain and all your symptoms. So we're going to get a senior ER doctor to just check you over and just double check, see what we can find out. So this guy comes in and he says, look, we're going to do a CT just in case. We think maybe you might have hurt your back, you might have fallen down. And I couldn't remember falling down. I couldn't remember doing anything, any kind of damage. And decided, okay, we'll do a CT. So they did a CT, and he came back, and I kid you not, his face was white as a ghost. And he came in, he
Oh
looked
boy.
at me, and he said, have you ever had cancer in your family? And I'm like, well, what is he asking me this question for? You've got to be joking. And I'd never even thought of cancer, that could possibly be an issue for me. I was only 35, and of course, everyone had told me I was healthy and beautiful looking, and there's no way I could have cancer, and I look fine. And I was working full time, and I had two little kids. So, how could I possibly have cancer? So, yeah, and he came back and he said, look, we found something really strange in your back, and we're going to have to keep you overnight for testing. And I'm like, okay, so what do I do now? Do I tell my work that I'm not going to come back? And, what's going on? So they put me in a ward where they put people that they're investigating from the ER. And we decided to go through the testing that they wanted us to go through. And it actually took 3 days. We went through scan after scan after scan. And eventually this Asian woman doctor came to me, and I remember everything about it. And I remember that she was an Asian doctor. She was a lovely woman. And she came up to me and she said, look, I've been chosen to tell you what's going on. And I'm like, okay, why is she talking like this? She said it was almost as if she had pulled the short straw. And there was a group of doctors standing over next to a nurse's station, and they'd obviously chosen her to tell me the news. And she said, we think you have tumors in your back and all through the right-hand side of your body. We don't know what you're fighting. We have no idea what the disease is, but we think you might have cancer. And that was the beginning of a huge, huge journey that I've been on. And you can just imagine the shock of hearing those words with my husband next to me, knowing that I had a 2-year-old at home, and well, she was almost 3 at that stage, and a 5-year-old and a full-time job and a mortgage and a house. And I was just...
What went through your mind at that time?
I remember I was just numb, and you hear that from people who've heard shocking news before. They feel numb. First of all, I did feel some relief because someone actually believed what I was saying, and to be told that that there's nothing wrong with you for almost 12 months, and then to have someone actually believe you is a bit of a relief. But also you feel absolutely in shock because of my age, and also because when you get cancer, there's no big red light that goes off says you've got cancer, no big flashing warning light to say that you've got cancer. You just obviously think that it's something else you've done, and you always think it's never going to be you. You always think it's going to be someone else, And so I can't really recall the words that went through my head, but I was just numb, and at the same time I had a bit of relief about the fact that someone knew what was occurring with me. And I remember I was in shock. So I grabbed her shirt. I don't know why I did this. I grabbed her shirt at the front and I said to her, please, 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 please tell those doctors over at the nurses station that were looking at me. I said, please tell them to do everything they can for me, because I have 2 little girls at home. I need to live for my girls, And I just went into survival mode, really. I knew that I had probably had cancer for a long time. I was diagnosed with a low-grade follicular non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And for those who don't know what lymphoma is, it's a cancer of the lymphatic system. It's often caused by exposure to environmental toxins and also viruses. So what they found with me, and they wondered why at 35 I contracted this disease, because often it's classed as an old person's disease. And what they'd found with me is that I'd had glandular fever when I was younger, and I had no idea I'd had this, but they found that antibody in my blood. I'd also had a virus called Epstein-Barr virus, which is responsible for what they call chronic fatigue syndrome. A lot of people get that. And the virus is usually carried by about 90% of the population. And some people, it makes them very, very sick, like the chronic fatigue syndrome. And I'd had both those viruses, and in combination, they're known to cause lymphoma over a long period of time. And so they think that my body was exposed to those 2 viruses, and as a result, a malignancy in my lymphatic system started. And I could have had it for many, many years. So they told me that I had a low grade, and I'm saying, wow, low grade, that's good. That's good, right? That means it's non-aggressive. And they said, well, that's true, but they said the aggressive lymphomas can often be cured very quickly, and we can eradicate them, and they're gone from your system, and you're cured, and you can get on with life. But the low-grade lymphomas always, always, always come back. So when you hear that and you're a young person, you're thinking, oh, come on, I have my chemo, I have my radiation or whatever I need, and I can get back on track with my life. But they said to me, basically, you're going to probably live for about 20 years, unless there's a cure that comes up between now and then. And, you'll get your chemo and relapse again, then you'll get more chemo, and then you'll relapse again. And so hearing all of this, even at the beginning, was crazy. I'm like, you've got to be joking, there must be another way around this. Well, I just had to try and digest all of that. And obviously by that time, my brain was spinning and I felt depressed and I felt very anxious about my future and the future of my family. But I had to do my chemo and I had to do radiotherapy. In fact, I had to do emergency radiotherapy because I had tumors all the way down my right-hand side of my body, from the original lump that I had underneath my right breast all the way down to my lower right back. And I had tumors wrapped around what's called the S1 nerve, and that's a nerve that carries a signal from your brain right down to your right leg and right down to your right foot. And I really had malignancy everywhere. So we tried a certain kind of chemo at first, a very low toxic chemo, if you could call it that, and it didn't work. The cancer did not respond. So we had to try a more toxic chemotherapy. The lymphoma did respond, but I needed to do at least 6 rounds of that. So I did that. My hair fell out, which was a huge shock to a young 30-something girl or woman. And sometimes what the chemo does to your body is more shocking than what the actual cancer does to your body. And looking in the mirror and finding yourself bald is sort of an outward appearance or an outward sign that you're not very well when you actually look fine. So I went through all my chemo. I went through emergency radiotherapy because my right leg was being threatened by these tumors that were wrapped around my S1 nerve. They were also pushing into my sacrum, which is a small bone at the base of your spine. And they were eating into the bone. There was nerves and muscles that were being eaten into by tumors. So I had quite a profuse stage 4, which is the last stage of most cancers, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And we just had to do what we could to save my life and to save my right leg. I wanted to try and get back into normal life. And most people who are going through cancer just want to have a normal life again. They just don't really want to be pitied or have to stay off work or whatever. So I was determined to get back to work, and I did go back to work. I had some issues with my right leg. It wasn't quite as comfortable as it used to be, but I was still able to walk around and do a lot of things, a lot of functions at home and work. And it was after about 8 months that I started to get problems with my right toes. They weren't working the way they used to. I was getting numbness and pain down my right leg, and I decided to tell my hematologist, who was my main specialist at the time. I said, I think there's something going on. It's not quite the same as what it used to be. And it took us a long time, but we finally found some kind of tumor activity that was coming back around that S1 nerve. And I had to, unfortunately, leave work at that time. I decided that if it did come back, that it was no use me trying to keep working when I was fighting something else. I needed to really just concentrate on that journey and try and get through it. And so I went back into hospital, started chemotherapy again. And this time they had to decide, do we give her what's called a bone marrow transplant and try and give her a new blood system, which is what I really needed, or do we just give her a very strong chemotherapy and see if we can just get rid of it with the chemo? And they decided just to use the chemo. And this particular drug they gave me, called fludarabine, it was a very, very strong drug. It was one of the strongest chemos they could give me. And it made me very, very sick. I lost my hair once again. And, by this time I was like, just, like nothing shocked me anymore. I'd been through a lot. And, so I had my second encounter with the cancer, and we got rid of it. And for 4 years, everything was okie dokie, wonderful. I wasn't able to work. I was really tired after that point, fighting for my life twice, as you could imagine. And I just felt like I needed to have a break and stay at home and just look after the family and relax after everything I'd been through. And I was at home one day doing the vacuuming, and I sat down and I felt this. It was a familiar pain. It felt like bone pain, like a throbbing pain in my hips and in my thigh bone. And it was similar to a pain I'd felt in my shoulder area back when I had my first cancer. It felt like a throbbing pain that I couldn't get rid of. And instead of worrying about it too much, I thought, well, let me just wait and see if this is going to come back or if this is just me making it up. I wanted to be absolutely sure before I went to my specialist, my hematologist. I wanted to make sure that I wasn't pretending or thinking that it was something that it wasn't. You know what I mean? So I left it for a week, and then I went to my hematologist and I had my regular blood test, and she said to me, your bloods have dipped, your white blood cells and your red blood cells and everything has dipped overnight almost. And I said, that's funny because I've had some pain in my hip and in my thigh bone. And well, she just, her face again, like the first ER surgeon, went white as a ghost. And she said, we need to do a bone marrow aspirate, which is what I'd had many times. And that's where they stick a large needle through your hip and they suck out some bone marrow. They look at it underneath the microscope, and then they go, okay, she's got cancer or she's got something else, and they can see it floating around inside the bone marrow. So we had that. And then she came to me and she said, look, I have something surprising to tell you. She said, you actually don't have lymphoma at this time. You have a second kind of cancer. And I'm like, you've got to be joking. I couldn't believe it. I had lymphoma still. It wasn't active at the time, but I had a second kind of cancer called myelodysplasia. And it was caused, according to her, and we'd found out through the type of cancer, the type of myelodysplasia it was, we'd found out that it was caused by the chemo I had for the lymphoma.
If that was it.
Yes. And then people say that, that chemo can cause cancer. It can in very rare circumstances. So not only had I had a rare form of lymphoma at my age, but I'd had a rare reaction to the chemo from the second. It was actually from the second lot of chemo I'd had.
What were you thinking about life at that point in time? Were you like, what did I do wrong? What is going on?
Exactly. I mean, I'm a very positive person. So, but I had to, there was nothing I could do about it. I mean, it wasn't like I could control it, and I had to think of like, I'm a faith-filled person too. So I thought, well, I've got to use this somehow to help other people or I'd seen a lot of things happen, particularly through the medical negligence thing I'd been through. And, I'd actually taken that all the way to our state medical board, and the gentleman who was the GP that was supposed to be looking after me at the time, the primary care physician, he got in trouble for, misdiagnosing me or giving me what was called a delayed diagnosis. He didn't really diagnose me at all. He just caused a lot of the problems because he kept telling me there was nothing wrong with me. So, he got in trouble for that. But, by the time I had this third cancer, I'm like, well, can you guys help me with it? They said the only way we can get rid of it is by a bone marrow transplant. And it wouldn't be using your own stem cells, which is often what they do. They'll take your stem cells out of your body through your blood and they'll clean it up and then they'll re-inject them in and give you a new new bone marrow, new blood system through your own stem cells, which is incredible how they do all this medical technology. It's amazing. But they said you're going to need donor stem cells or donor bone marrow because your bone marrow is now failing and it's not working properly. So we checked my sister. My sister wasn't a match, and we really needed to then go on to the International Bone Marrow Registry, and there is one. When you give blood at the blood bank, you often have the ability to say, look, I'd like to give stem cells or bone marrow, and they register you. And then you can give bone marrow or stem cells to someone if you're matched with them and they need it anywhere in the world. So by that point, I'm like really fighting for my life. I had to have blood transfusions regularly because my bone marrow wasn't making the right type of blood. It wasn't making really much blood at all. It was making blood, but it was an awful quality. And so I had to, without a bone marrow transplant, I would have died. So we actually found, and the funny thing is we found a match in the United States, which was unusual because, they look all over the world. They look in Australia and New Zealand first for me because that's where I was located.
Right.
And we found a 30-year-old male in the United States. That's all I know about him. I'm not allowed to know anything else. It's very private, the whole process. His bone marrow was then harvested from him, and he was very kind in going through all sorts of needles and procedures and going to the hospital just for me. He didn't know who I was, and I didn't know who he was, but he did it to save my life, which is just incredible.
That's amazing.
I don't know where he was situated in the United States. All I know is that he was my savior. So his bone marrow was harvested from him, and it was sent on a plane with a scientist all the way from the United States to Australia, and it just made it in time to match my chemo regime. So I had to have 7 days of more chemotherapy, and then that sort of actually basically killed off my old bone marrow that I was born with, and his bone marrow was then injected into my bloodstream, and from that point on, I started to, well, his bone marrow started to produce new blood for me. And the funny thing is now I have his DNA in my bone marrow, and my blood type changed to his blood type.
Interesting, yeah.
Which is
did that
just
affect you at all?
incredible because
even mentally, did that affect you?
It doesn't affect me. People often say when you have a bone marrow transplant, you take on the familiar details of your donor. I've even heard some people say that it changes your eye color and your hair color, which doesn't happen.
That sounds a little bit out there.
People will believe the only thing I noticed was that prior to having my bone marrow transplant with this gentleman's bone marrow, I didn't really like the flavor of strawberries, but afterwards all I wanted was strawberries.
Interesting.
So I wondered if maybe, and I wrote to him hoping he would write back. He never did write back because it has to go through several hospitals, so I wasn't sure if he ever got it, but I wanted to thank him, and I actually said to him in the card that I sent to him, I said, I'm not sure if you like strawberries, but for some reason I have like this insatiable appetite for strawberries now. So maybe he loves strawberries, I don't know, but I did get his blood type. So it's funny, your bone marrow of course produces your blood, and I had an O positive blood type when we started, and then I went to an A positive blood type. So I now have his DNA and his blood type floating around in me, which means I'm part American and part Australian.
And you love strawberries.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So you gotta see some positive in it, haven't you? I mean, now it's been 3 years since I had my bone marrow transplant, and I take 50 pills a day to keep me healthy. We have to do that because just like with a heart transplant or any kind of organ transplant, there's a problem with rejection sometimes. His bone marrow was a match for me, but it wasn't a perfect match. So We have to make sure that my immune system is suppressed a little bit so that we don't have an all-out war between his DNA and my DNA. So that's why I have to take so many pills a day, and there's other things that I have to deal with. But the main thing is that I'm alive, and I have a lot of other issues with my right leg and everything else. But I just have to see the positive in everything, and that's the way I've raised my kids to see. Okay, I've fought cancer 3 times. I've had a bone marrow transplant. I've dealt with rejection disease. I've dealt with medical negligence. And just actually on Friday, I was told I'll probably have to have a hip replacement, believe it or not, because I had a lot of steroids when we went through the bone marrow transplant, and just 5 days of high steroid usage has caused a little bit of disease inside my bones, particularly where my hip is, my right hip. And so they say that's sometimes a late complication of bone marrow transplants, and they say I'll probably have to have that hip replaced, which was a shock, another challenge that I'll have to go through. But hey, the thing is, like, I'm here for my husband, I'm here for my kids, I'm alive, and I'm using my story to help people along their own journey. So that's currently where I am in the simplified terms.
Yeah, of course. And how has this whole journey of yours affected your outlook on life and your ultimate just passion for life? Can you give us a picture of how it looked before this journey and now where you're at and after? And you're still in this journey, But yeah, can you give us a little bit of a description?
Of course, so before I do remember, like, before cancer, and this was 10 years ago, you sort of take life for granted. You don't really think about the fact that you could die suddenly or something could happen to you. And you often sort of think to yourself, life's cruisy, life's good, white picket fence, everything's going really well, and you sort of take for granted your health and the fact that you're young and you have, healthy kids or whatever. But when something happens to you, then you really start to embrace what's good about life and what you enjoy. And I remember going back to work the first time and watching people, they were jaywalking in the city. And I was watching people walk across a red jaywalk sign, and I thought to myself, why are these people doing this? Why are they risking their lives? When I'd been through so much to fight for my own life, and these people were risking their own by, jutting out in front of cars and everything else. And I just thought, I wish I could just grab them and tell them to really think about their life and stop sort of risking it because I'd fought so hard for my life. I remember thinking that. And I also remember, going through all of these chemo processes and in hospital, looking out over the city and thinking, the world's just going by and I'm just really fighting for my life here and I'm really finding it very hard. But, as long as I am alive, that's the main thing. As long as I'm taking a breath and I'm alive and I can enjoy my kids and my husband, then I'm successful in beating this thing. So it really was taking life for granted beforehand, but now feeling like life is so precious, everything's so precious. I remember coming out of my bone marrow transplant and I'd been in the ward for probably 2.5 months and I'd hardly gone outside. I was just exhausted from the whole process. I'd had to go on a special machine where they fed me every day because I couldn't get food down my throat. My throat was totally swollen from the transplant. My mouth was full of sores. I couldn't eat anything. And, because of the rejection process of the bone marrow transplant. And I remember going to my parents' house. I had to stay with them for about 3 months and I had to be watched very carefully because the doctor said to me, we will not proceed with transplant unless you have a carer for at least 3 months to watch you full time. So my parents had to do that for me. I remember going to their house and looking outside and seeing the birds and the trees and thinking, oh, these things are so beautiful and so precious, and I never noticed them before.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what happens when you go through a really difficult circumstance. You start to see the good things about life and how much you treasure them. Even when things are hard, you start to realize how beautiful life is and how precious everything is. That's really what it feels like.
I just have a couple more
Absolutely.
questions for you, then,
Yeah.
Jodie. And before I go to those questions, though, let's give a quick shout out to your website. It is jodiesjourney.com, right? And it's
Yes. Spelt Jodie. Yeah. And look, it's a resource that's there for not just patients but medical staff too. Anyone who wants to read my journey. And I've just finished my full manuscript of my full story, and I'm now looking for a literary agent. So I'm hoping that sooner or later I'll be able to get that published. And that's the next project that I've got my head around at the moment. And so, yeah, that resource is there. If anyone wants to contact me and talk to me about their situation, I do talk to a lot of people. I'm happy to talk to patients. So that's jodiesjourney.com.
Excellent. Yeah. And I want to ask you something then, and this is I just have a couple more questions, like I said, but I want to ask you, can you elaborate on some of the experiences that you had during that time when it was at its worst?
So, like, I remember specific times when I was in the ward and I was in extreme pain. Actually, this was when I first had a lot of tumors in my body, and I didn't know that there was drugs I could ask for that would relieve my pain. I'd never even tried morphine. I didn't know anything about it. I had paracetamol a few times, but that was about it. And I was having to use a hot water bottle to keep the pain off my back. I had to do something because the pain was excruciating. I remember looking out over the city at night, and I would see these planes flying through the nighttime to the local airport. And I used to work, like I said, in airlines in the United States and here in Australia, and with Boeing, and the whole miracle of flight and seeing these planes go across. I thought, well, if a plane can take off and fly through the sky, then maybe there's hope for me, And over the city, there was a hill just in front of me, and there was a church right on top of the hill. And I found out later it was a Catholic church, and it used to house Polish immigrants in the First World War. I only found that out by looking it up, and it had a big blue cross on the top of the building. And at the time, I just looked across and I thought, well, I had a deep faith, and I said to myself, well, God, if you're really there and, you're reminding me that you're there with this cross, then I know somehow, some way that there must be some purpose behind this. There's got to be a purpose, You brought me to this earth for some reason, and, there must be something that I have to do with this, And that was probably my lowest time. And I remember crying and crying and crying. And I was probably very depressed, but I kept saying to myself, I can deal with this. I'm really strong. I'm a soldier. I can battle it through. I probably needed some medication to really just calm me down. And at the time, I felt like I was, I knew I was depressed after the fact. And it was a very difficult time, but it was looking out over the city and seeing that cross on the top of the building. I knew there was hope. I knew there was hope for me. I knew that if other people could battle it, that someone was there for me to, my foundation was faith. So I just knew that I had to keep going. That was probably the lowest point for me, going and seeing people going about their business down below the hospital. I just felt like a nothingness, that my whole life had just been ripped apart. I'd had a great job, the best job I'd ever had in my life. My two little girls, a great marriage, a house, a mortgage, everything else. A mortgage is not great, but I still had a house.
Of course.
And yes, no one likes a mortgage, do they? And so, yeah, I just, I think that cross gave me some help, some hope, because I just felt like God hadn't given up on me. So that was important for me. It's different for everyone. Other people have a different foundation, but for me, that was my foundation, and that was important for me.
It's nice to hear that even despite everything that's going on, that yeah, there
Yeah,
are still those moments where it's,
there
you're going
are.
to be okay.
And like, it's so important to have a foundation in life. Like I said, everyone has a different foundation. Some people it's their family, some people it's their faith, some people it's a group of friends or whatever. But I think if you find a foundation that is immovable, some foundations are built on sand, some foundations are built on stone and rock. And I think I found my foundation that was built on a rock, and I felt like it was immovable for me. So whatever happened to me, I knew that my family would somehow be taken care of, that, God might provide for them. And I just believed that in faith. And so,
That's something that I guess everyone. It's just interesting to think about. How we all do, just
yeah,
whether we realize it or not. We do have
yeah,
certain foundations, and they all differ. And it's really
yeah,
good to think about that. I have one last question here. I want you to
yes,
pretend like that you and your family are visiting Sydney, and you're strolling through
yes,
the botanical garden, and then of course you stumble upon that beautiful opera house, and it's
yes,
grandeur, it's beautiful. But then all of a sudden, for you, for some reason, everything
yeah,
freezes. Your family that you're with, they freeze in time. Everyone around you,
yeah,
everything freezes. And out of the opera
yeah.
house comes a person. Well, you think it's a person, but you actually find out that it's an alien life form. And they've come to
Okay.
Sydney, but he tells you
Yeah,
he's a journalist and he's trying to figure out how things operate on various planets and whatnot. He only has 5 minutes though, and
okay.
he's chosen you. He
Yeah,
wants to find out how you see and understand life on this planet. So, what would you tell this
right.
alien who looks just like that actor Benedict Cumberbatch?
Okay. What would I tell him about life on Earth? Well, being a positive person, first of all, I would ask him, why did you choose me? Why do you want to talk to me? I mean, surely you could talk to the president or maybe someone more important, or, whatever. But,
Maybe he would say that,
I'd
he
probably
doesn't
tell,
care about those things. On their planet, the celebrity thing, that's not even in existence.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I would, being the positive person that I am, and I always come from that point of view. I mean, some people would, who'd been through the same thing I'd been through, and probably we're talking about post cancer, I would assume.
Yeah.
um, yeah, I would, tell him that there are great opportunities here on Earth to make an impact on your greater mission. So I think everyone on earth has a mission, some kind of mission built into their bodies, their souls, their spirits, and there's something good for us to do on earth. And I think that's the reason why many of us are brought here on earth, some way, somehow. There's something for us to do, and there's a great opportunity for us to make a mark and to do something good with anything that's happened in our lives, whether it be a good thing or a bad thing. And so I would tell him that being here on earth is something that I enjoy, something I love, something I want to remember forever, wherever my spirit may go past this life. And I believe that that's heaven, so for me. So I would tell him, opportunity is everywhere here on earth, and you have to grab it and grasp it and do something really good with what's happened to you. So that's kind of what I would say to him.
I love it. I love it.
I hope that's enough for him.
He's like, well, thank you. Yeah. Every single time I ask that question, or in its various forms, I get a different answer, and I
Yeah.
love, and once again, a unique answer. And Jodie, thank you so much. Well, you have an excellent rest of your day then.
Thank you. You have a great day too. Thanks for talking to me. Bye-bye.
Hey, thank you so much for checking out this episode of In the Shoes Of. If you like or don't like the podcast, feel free to leave a review or reach out to me. My email is jnickel42@gmail.com. I can't promise you I'll get back to you right away, but I'll definitely try and get to it. Anyway, thank you so much for checking it out. Until the next time, see you later.